G'day, Orlando. My name's Oren Thomas. I'm a Principal Cloud Advocate at Microsoft, and today I'm giving you a fundamental session, Security in Azure. Okay, look at this. Through 2020, 95% of cloud security failures are gonna be the customer's fault. Cloud security is a shared responsibility. Now, what does that mean? It means that Microsoft has explicitly explained that there's certain things that they're responsible for, or we're responsible for, I guess, now that I'm a Microsoftie, and there's certain things that you're responsible for. Things that we're responsible for. Well, we go and build these really big data centers and we put fences around them. And there's guard dogs and machine gun, well, probably not. Crocodiles, snakes, you know, the usual sort of stuff you have in the backyard. We're responsible for data center operations. What that means is if someone wants a job working in one of our data centers, some questions, see if they're cool. We're responsible for the cloud infrastructure and the fabric. Now, what does that mean? It means that when there's things like the Heartbleed vulnerability, we make sure that we go through and patch all of the systems that might be vulnerable in the data centers. So all of that underlying infrastructure is going to be looked after. But what is a joint responsibility, or kind of your responsibility, is things like virtual machines and networks. So what does that mean? Well, think about it this way. If you buy a car, when you buy a car, if there's something wrong with the car when you buy it, that's the dealer's responsibility. So when you deploy a virtual machine from the gallery, it'll be patched right up to the nines. But the moment you deploy that virtual machine, patching it becomes your responsibility. It's something you've got to do. If you deploy an app to the cloud and it's got a big fat security vulnerability in it, that's not our fault. Okay, as much as you're like, I didn't do it. Yeah, you did. So the shared responsibility model is kind of more a denial of liability model. The security of data is your fault. We're going to give you a whole lot of tools to secure your data, but it's like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. We can give you all the tools in the world to secure your data, but unless you use them, your data's not going to be secure. Okay. The characters and organisations discussed in this presentation are fictional and don't exist. So if you recognise anything, it's not because I was sitting in one of your meetings. It's not because I know your mates and they've been talking out of school. It's just because I'm giving a general example of something that happens in the industry. So, I'm going to give my examples based on a fictional company named Tailwind Traders. And Tailwind Traders has got an ops guy called Wally Drongo. And Wally works as the IT ops and security leader in the Dubbo head office of Tailwind Traders. Dubbo is the name of a real place. If you don't believe me, consult an atlas. Okay, so Wally's manager, Charlene, had Wally migrate a whole lot of workloads and all their VMs out of the Wagga Wagga co-location facility into Azure. And if you don't believe that Wagga Wagga is a real place, I suggest you consult an atlas. Now, Charlene asked Wally to do this because she was under the impression that if they just migrated those workloads out of the colo in Wagga Wagga, or if you're Australian, you're lazy, you just call it Wagga, Microsoft would take care of all the security of those workloads. That they wouldn't have to worry anymore because everything was going to be done for them. This is my impression of that. So, Wally's goals. He needs to understand the security of configuration of what's going on in Azure. Because Wally's been on-prem his whole life. Wally's about 50, he's been in the industry a long time. He's known how to secure stuff that's on-prem, but this cloud stuff, it's a new, what they call paradigm. So Wally doesn't know exactly what he's got to do to make it secure. Wally's worried about administrative roles. He'd like to say that he trusts all of his colleagues, and he's talked to a few other people that have been in the cloud. And he's looked around and he's seen everybody in his friends' company's cloud subscriptions a global administrator. And that way lies pain. So he wants to make sure he's got a good administrative model for what's going on in that cloud subscription. He needs to restrict access to sensitive storage accounts, and I'll explain why in a minute. He needs to be notified in the event that someone starts doing some dodgy stuff to their SQL databases in the cloud. And he wants to make sure that if anything dodgy is an Australian word for sketchy, I don't know if you use it here, if anything unusual, anything problematic is going on in Azure Active Directory, wants to be notified about it. So how does Wally Drongo understand the quality of the Tailwind Traders cloud security posture against what it's possible for him to do in Azure? Well, let me give you a quick demo of Azure Security Score and how that can help him out. Okay, so here I am in the Azure console. I click on Security Center. I click on Secure Score. So what it does is it gives me a nice number. We can see that number here. And that number is 285 out of 515. So if you're Australian, 60%, pretty good. We're not a country that wins gold medals, but we're bloody happy when we win bronze. Okay, so let's dig into one of these categories. Let's go in and have a look at compute apps and resources. So what this is telling us, it's given us a whole lot of information about stuff that Wally can go and do to improve his security score. And because, people like to gamify stuff, you can see that each one of these activities, by resolving it, gives you some points. And who doesn't love points? So, if he enabled just-in-time network access control, he'd get 30 points. If he turned on vulnerability assessment for virtual machines, he'd get 30 points. If he was monitoring his agent health issues, he'd get another 30 points. You can see there's a list, and they're basically ranked in order of importance. You can dig down, you can look at VMs and computers. You can see this VM here, and you can see the recommendations. You can scroll down in Azure Security Center, and you can see, okay, I've got some high-level recommendations, and I've got some medium-level recommendations. He can come back to Security Center. He can go in and look at his networking resources. He can see what his riskiest resources are. He can again look at what needs to be configured for his networking resources. He needs subnets with network security groups. He can go back. He can go and look at his identity and access resources. And again, basically here it's saying, go and configure multi-factor authentication. So that, right at the beginning, gives Wally a quick view of the stuff that he might want to address. And if you're ever doing a bit of consulting on Azure, one of the simplest things you can do is fire up Security Center, get that secure score, take a screenshot, get the list of stuff you've got to do, resolve it, and I'll show you how to resolve those in a minute, and then just work through that list. And then you're improving an organisation's security in a very simple way where it's been analysed and you know what's going on. So you strengthen your security posture with insights and guidance. You get an idea of what's going on in something where you might not know what you need to do. The Secure Score measures what you've done in your environment compared to what can possibly be done. So it's not like one of those checklists where they're telling you to do stuff that's completely irrelevant to your environment. What it is it's a checklist of stuff that you can do given what you've actually got. Your score will change depending on what resources you have in the subscription. So your maximum possible score depends on your resources. Two organisations can have only the same score if they have the same resources deployed with the same security configuration. So if your boss is in the Qantas lounge in Sydney and he's had a few drinks with another boss, and the other boss has gone, mate, our organisation has a secure score of 2,000 out of 6,000, and your boss has gone, I don't know, mate, we've only got like 1,000 out of 1,200. Your organisation's doing real good, and the other bloke's not so good. Secure Score will change as new security options become available. For example, when we made VM encryption possible, that became something that you could do with your Secure Score. Okay, Wally is more worried about auditors than it is about hackers. Hackers are friendly people that wear hoodies. Auditors wear ties. How many people have you seen at this event with a tie? How does Wally understand the quality of Tailwind Traders' security posture against the benchmarks that the auditors are going to assess him against? How does he understand it against Azure SIS and ISO 27001? Well, the good thing is that Azure Security Centre has a Policy and Compliance Centre. And the Policy and Compliance Centre allows you to audit your subscription against these particular benchmarks. Let me show you how. So here we are in the Secure Centre. I click Regulatory Compliance. And here I see the controls that have been passed versus the controls that haven't been passed in a bunch of different benchmarks. For example, Azure SIS is selected first. And I'll explain what these benchmarks are in a moment. So if we go down to storage accounts, we can see we've got green on ensure that secure transfer is enabled, but we've got red on ensure that default network access rules for storage accounts is set to deny. And we can drill into that. We can see which particular storage account is problematic, and we can be given some advice on how to go and resolve that so we can become compliant with that particular guideline. We can go into virtual machines. We can see that it's red here. We can see that the operating system disk is not encrypted, and it says disk encryption should be applied on your virtual machines. Your data disks should be encrypted. Make sure your patches are applied, and at the moment it looks like they are. We can go back up and we can go across to a different benchmark, ISO 27001, which is one of the most commonly used benchmarks in the world for computer security. So again, same deal. We can go in and we can look at the different controls and assessments against those controls. And each one of these benchmarks measures a different set of things. So you might be completely compliant with one benchmark and only like 30 or 40% compliant with others. For those of you that are wandering around near the door, there's a stack of seats over here, mostly because people went on this side of the room so they could escape if I was crap. So here, control of operational software, and again, saying adaptive application control should be turned on. Communication security, we can see again, these are each mapping to one of those compliance benchmarks and the number within the benchmark. So the idea is, if you've got the auditors turning up at your place, you can go through and assess your subscription, and you can get a fairly good idea of where your subscription's at. You can resolve it. Now, does this mean you're going to completely pass an audit? No, these people have ties. They're always going to find something to pick you up on. But what it does mean is that you're not going to be picked up on for something stupid, right? You're going to be picked up for something clever. And you never want to be in the position of being the person in the room that hasn't done the simple thing. You want to be like, oh, well, if you'd done this and then done that and you didn't done that, then you'd be good. It'd be like, you didn't do something obvious, you drongo. Okay, security and compliance. So at the moment, Azure Security Centre will assess you against Azure SIS, that's an independent benchmark, PCI DSS 3.2.1, ISO 27001, and SOC TSP. Each one of these is an independent benchmark. So at the start, I showed you security score. That's what you can do compared to what Azure can do. These are the third-party recognised things that you will be assessed against. Though having said that, there are now insurance companies that are looking at setting cybersecurity insurance premiums based on your Azure or your Office 365 secure score. So maybe in a couple of years, you'll see more of that sort of thing going on. Okay, so Wally's seen what he needs to do. How does he actually resolve some of this stuff? Well, the good thing is that there's a whole lot of stuff that you can do straight from that console that allows you to resolve those security issues. Let me show you how. So we go into Security Centre, we select recommendations, and we've got our recommendations. So the first one, multi-factor authentication. So if we click here, install endpoint protection on VMs, it'll show us the VMs that are in the subscription. I can click install on one VM. I can select, in this case, Microsoft's anti-malware solution. I can click create. It'll give me a basic configuration for anti-malware solution. I click OK. And what that does is it goes and pushes an antivirus solution into those VMs. Bang, I've improved that bit of security. If I go back to my recommendations, I go to monitoring health agent, I've got disk encryption. Now, disk encryption's a bit trickier because with disk encryption, it's not one of those push button get donut results. What it is it'll give you advice on how to go and do that and the documents that you need to use to do it. With just-in-time network access, what just-in-time network access does is it allows you to limit connections to a VM so that they're only available from a specific IP address for a specific length of time. So instead of going, oh, you know what I'll do? I'll make it so that I can RDP into this VM from anywhere in the world. I work in Tasmania, but if someone wants to RDP into it from Moscow, awesome. We all believe in inclusivity at Microsoft, just not inclusivity of access to VMs from anybody around the world. Anyway, so what I'm doing here is I'm turning JIT on for one VM. The moment I want to turn it on, it gives me a list of ports. Do you want to give access on these ports? So I just want to do RDP access. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and delete the other ports. So I only need 3389. Then I can go and configure the properties of 3389. I can say, OK, allow access from a particular block of IP addresses. So in Wally's case, Wally works in Dubbo. So Wally's putting in his ISP's public IP addresses, which is 128.250.213.0/24. And he can allow access based on that. Or he can say, you know what, per request. And when he does it on a per request basis, what happens is he has to log into the console. The console picks up which IP address he's using, and then when he makes that request, it'll open the RDP port to that particular IP address. And you can configure what the maximum request time is. Now, what that means in this case, we've set it to 10 hours, is that when Wally logs onto the console and he selects that option, it'll look at his IP address and go, OK, that's Wally's IP address, 128.250.213.212. And for the next 10 hours, he can RDP from that IP address. When we get to 11 hours, he can't initiate any new connections, but if he's got an existing connection, that'll be fine unless that connection breaks, and then he'll have to re-establish a connection by re-enabling just-in-time access. So we've turned that recommendation on. We've gone and dealt with that. We go back to our Security Centre recommendations. And what we can do is we actually have to click reload. So I can click on recommendations over here. I can then refresh the browser, and what I see when I refresh the browser is that those recommendations that I've resolved have been removed. So it's just a matter of ticking stuff off on a list. Okay, resource security hygiene. As I said, it'll look at compute and apps, it'll look at networking, it'll look at IoT hubs and resources, and it'll also look at data and storage. As time goes on, there will be more and more and more recommendations for you. So it's not just a static thing. If you've got everything done today, that's great, but in 6 months' time, there might be more stuff for you to do, which is good because it means you've still got a job. Okay, so how does Wally ensure that administrative tasks are only performed by authorised users? So he knows, and I've been into startups, and I've wandered into the startup, and on the whiteboard is a single account that's got global administrator access to the cloud subscription, and the passwords are written on the whiteboard. That's bloody stupid, isn't it? Okay, let me show you how privileged identity management works. So Wally works with a bloke named Don Funk. And Don works on the service desk. And Don needs to occasionally change passwords. But Don's got a habit of going to the pub in the evening. So what they want to do is they only want to allow Don to have this particular privilege for a certain amount of time. We'll let Don change passwords, but we'll only allow him to do it during the day. So I'm logged in as Don. And what I'll do is I'm going into Azure Active Directory, and Don's going to go and change the password of a bloke named Sam Obolros. So he clicks Reset Password, and it says, well, Don, the password can't be reset because you do not have permission to do that. So Don goes, yeah, I need to request that. So Don goes to his dashboard, he selects Privileged Identity Management, he selects the roles that he can request, and the role he can request is Password Administrator, so he clicks Activate, and then he fills out a little form. He clicks Activate again, and it says, okay, you've got a maximum of an hour, what are you doing? And Don writes, well, I'm going to go and reset Sam's password. He clicks Activate. That's all logged. And then once that's activated, which happens pretty quickly, Don can go back into Azure Active Directory, click on Sam's account, and reset Sam's password. And that's how easy it is to do privileged identity management. And that means that when Don's down at the pub later on, and he's feeling like playing a joke on Sam, you won't be able to do it. That's much funnier in Wagga. Okay, so privileged identity management. The role membership's granted only for a limited amount of time. Roles can be configured to require staff to perform multi-factor authentication. So I did it real simple then, but I could say, right, Don, if you want to have that role, prove that you are who you say you are and perform MFA. In fact, you can go further than that. You can actually require roles to be reviewed by an approver, so that if Don wants that role, Wally has to actually say, yeah, Don, you can have that role. You can configure all requests to be logged, and you can even configure an email to be sent every time someone puts through a request. All roles should be managed by PIM. So any privileged role in your Azure subscription, you should eventually aim to have managed by Privileged Identity Management. What you should then do is you should have a single global administrator account that no one uses, and that you configure alerting so that if someone signs in to this account, all of your alarms go off, because that's your break glass account. The normal day-to-day accounts, you're just elevating when you need those privileges. That way you're much more secure. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be like some organisations that have the one global administrator account that everybody knows, or like 5 global administrator accounts, including 2 from people who left the organisation several months ago. Wouldn't say that I've ever seen that. Okay, so Wally's mate, Lards Kookaburra, was recently fired because he left the security of one of his company's cloud storage bins set to stark naked, leading to data to be spread from here to Wollongong. And if you don't believe Wollongong's a real place, I suggest you consult an atlas. Okay, so how can Wally ensure that only certain VMs in their subscription can access a specific storage account and that nothing else in the world can go and access that storage account? Let me show you how you can do storage account network traffic restrictions. So here I am in the Azure console. I'm going to subnet. So now at the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new subnet, and I'm going to go and connect all of my VMs to that subnet. And it's 192.168.15.0/24. And I select my service endpoints. Now it's Azure SQL, Azure Storage. And because I want it to be a storage account, I select storage that I'm going to be able to expose to that subnet. I click OK. So that subnet's now been created. There's a public subnet and a private subnet. So the next thing I'm doing is I'm going to go and create a storage account. So I type storage, I click storage accounts, I click add, and in the storage account creation wizard, I go through the motions, I select which subscription, which resource group I want to do, I give the storage account a name, I just call it restricted files, I specify where it's going to go. In this case, I'm throwing it in the data center in Singapore because they've got buckets of capacity. I'm just going with a fairly standard level of replication. This actually doesn't matter for what I'm going to go and do. But on the next advanced page, what I've got the option of doing is here specifying whether I'm going to allow access to anybody in the world or if I'm going to limit it to specific networks. So I go selected networks, I then select the virtual network, and that's my VMnet or new VMnet, and then which subnets. And here I'm saying, right, I only want to allow access from the private subnet. And in doing that, I'm saying the only subnet that can communicate with that storage account is going to be that subnet. So if I put a VM on that subnet and it needs to go and talk to the storage account, it'll be allowed to. But if there was a VM on the public subnet on that same virtual network, bad luck, you won't have access to that storage account. Okay, locking down service endpoints. It's not just storage that you can do that with. You can do it for Key Vault. You can do it for Service Bus. Any Azure as a service you can configure so that if you've got VMs interacting with that, for example with Key Vault, you go and keep your encryption certificates over there and you'll say, okay, I want only these VMs to be able to pull these secrets and certificates out of that Key Vault. So you use that by locking down which VMs can access it. You can remove internet access to those resources in that entirety. And that way, if someone's running one of those automatic code scanners against GitHub looking for open storage buckets or bins or whatever you want to call them, they're not going to be able to get to yours if you've locked them down. Okay, Barumbatok City Council was recently in the news after an SQL injection attack exposed a ton of data to everybody and their dog on the internet. And if you don't believe Barumbatok is an actual place, I suggest you consult an atlas. How can Wally Drongo improve the security of the Azure SQL instances? Let me show you how with Azure SQL Advanced Data Security. So here I am in the Azure console. I've gone to Advanced Data Security, and what I am connected to in the Azure console right here is I am connected to an Azure SQL instance. The Azure SQL server is called Vector Sigma, so I'm enabling this at the server level. So what I can do is I can go and choose a storage account to keep all of the security logs. I can then have a vulnerability assessment run against that Azure SQL server and the databases on that server. It will then automatically send the scan results to the email address that I've just specified. It'll also send the advanced threat protection reports to the email address I've just specified. Now, in terms of advanced threat protection, you can turn this on, and what this will do is it'll alert you if there are SQL injection vulnerabilities or SQL injection activities. So if someone looks like they're trying to use an SQL injection attack against your Azure SQL instance, this will notify you. If someone is removing a ton of data from your Azure SQL instance, it will go and notify you about it. If someone is performing an unsafe action, such as dropping a whole lot of tables, it will notify you about it. It'll also notify you about anomalous client logons. So I'm making sure all of those are in. I click OK. I click Save, and that is configured for Azure SQL Advanced Data Security. So I just talked through all of those. Now, it will notify you if there is access from an unusual location. So again, tow-in traders, if someone's accessing it from Dubbo, that's probably fine. If someone's accessing it from Washington or Moscow or Beijing or Botswana, probably not so good. It'll tell you about unusual data centers. So some people, when they're attacking resources in the cloud, and this goes for other clouds, not just ours, will actually launch the attacks from another data center in the same cloud provider. So for example, it has been known to happen that resources that might be sitting in an Australian data center run by Microsoft might be attacked from a data center in Western Europe, also run by Microsoft. So it will notify you if that happens. In the past, it was like, oh yeah, we just trust everything that's running in Azure, doesn't matter who's running it. Nah, you don't do that. It'll access from an unfamiliar principal. If there's an unusual account doing it, it'll notify you about it. And again, if someone writes a bad application that starts doing some unusual stuff to your Azure SQL database, it will notify you about that. And if someone's trying to brute force, that is the same logins, just getting different passwords tried against it, it'll notify you about that as well. Okay, so like spiders, snakes, sharks, crocodiles, lizard, blue-ringed octopus, stinging jellyfish, and manta rays that killed Steve Irwin, predators tend to lurk in network and infrastructure before they attack. In fact, in most attacks, what you tend to find is you tend to find that your attacker has actually had persistence in your environment for several weeks, if not several months. So what Wally wants to know is how can he automatically detect unusual activity that might point to an attacker already being present in their Azure AD environment. Let me show you how Azure Sentinel can be used to do this. Okay, so we're in the Azure console. I type Sentinel. I'll explain more about what Sentinel is after I've done the demo. I click Add to create a Sentinel workspace. This is where data from Sentinel is written. So I'm putting that into Southeast Asia. So once I've set up a Sentinel instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and use a data connector so that telemetry that's generated from Azure Active Directory is automatically put into Sentinel where it can be analysed and suspicious activity flagged. So here I've got the Azure Active Directory connector, and now by clicking Connect there, Azure Active Directory telemetry is now flowing into Sentinel. I can even go my Azure Active Directory identity protection or all Azure activity. And the more data that Sentinel's got, the more intelligent it can be about recommendations when it comes to problematic activity. So we've got identity protection, we add the connector there. It'll specify what the prerequisites are, what permissions it needs, and we've gone through and connected that. So once you've got all of those connectors connected, what you can do is you can jump into Sentinel and start having a look at a few workspaces or workbooks. So here I'm selecting a workbook for Azure AD sign-in logs, and it will give me reporting activity on all of the sign-ins that have occurred in this subscription. So I click View Workbook, and then what it'll do is it'll pull up all of the sign-ins that have occurred to that subscription, and it'll give me detailed information. So if I go in the last 5 minutes, I can see that I have had 3 logins from Australia, from Melbourne, which is obviously where I built this demo. And obviously, if you're starting to look at that and you can go and look at that report, you can go, wow, there's a whole lot of people trying to get in from Kiev. That doesn't look good, unless you're one of your political parties. Well, I thought it was funny. Okay, so that's how Azure Sentinel works. Okay, intelligent security analytics. Now let me explain a bit about what this does. The idea of Sentinel, or a cloud-based security incident and event management system, is that if you suck up all of the data that can be generated, not only across your Azure subscription, but it'll also take on-prem stuff, and then you subject it to a whole lot of machine learning. Machine learning can pick up suspicious activities a lot better than a bloke with an event log can. It'll detect suspicious activity, and then that's followed up on by security resources. It'll allow you to investigate threats with AI. So you've got AI backing you. So the AI flags activity and says, oi, Wally, have a look at this. Does this look good to you? And Wally might go, yeah, that's Damo down in Byron Bay. He's legit. Or it might be, Vladimir from Brisbane. Allows you to automatically respond to incidents rapidly with built-in orchestration. So what you can do is when a known type of incident occurs, you can set up some automation to go and resolve it. It might be that you notice that someone's doing some brute force against a VM, and then suddenly they've logged in. Might be a good idea to shut that VM down until you can have a closer look at it. Playbooks are how you do that. So a playbook is the other part. That's how you build the automation. And Microsoft has built a ton of automation playbooks already, and there's more and more coming along that allow you to configure an automatic response to security events. Now, just plugging it into Sentinel won't turn this on. You have to go and turn this on yourself because you have to decide what an appropriate response is, although we will give you recommendations. The connectors for Sentinel, there are at the moment 25. There's 3 more. Sentinel will also ingest telemetry from other cloud providers because Microsoft's a big, happy sharing company that likes to play well with others. Anyway, in this session, we talked about Wally Drongo's security goals for Azure Security, where he was starting off from the position of not knowing a lot about it, and he's going a bit further, which is what really a fundamental session's all about. Wally was able to understand the security configuration of the resources in his subscriptions and the steps that Wally could take to improve them. He learnt how he could minimise the permanent assignments of administrative roles to his mate Don Funk. He learnt how he could restrict access to sensitive storage accounts. He learned how he could be notified in the event that unusual SQL activity was occurring in their SQL databases, and he learned how he could analyse Azure Active Directory and Azure AD telemetry for unusual activities. This is itopstalk.com. That's what my group at Microsoft uses for its blogs. We follow on Twitter the ASOps hashtag. Thank you very much for your attention. Please remember to fill out your evaluations, and if you've got any questions or you want a sticker of this koala driving the V8 Interceptor from Mad Max, please come down the front. Thank you very much for your attention.